Welcome to Lean RPA Principles and Practice, Chapter 9, Operationalisation by Rob King. After the epic Chapter 8, Chapter 9 is a little simpler. So far, we've looked at the principles of RPA and lean thinking and looked at some of the tools and techniques that can help us define strategy, evaluate processes, and define efficient processes before we begin to select and deliver our automation. We've looked at a couple of different automation tools and the pros and cons. And we've looked at piloting. Piloting can help us evaluate and select the right tool, learn more about which processes are right for us, and put in place a set of processes that will allow us to operationalize the entire automation program. And that leads us neatly to Chapter 9. Chapter 9, we will look at the maturity model, how automation will evolve in your organization. We'll look at a concept called Hoshin Kanri, which is another name for strategy deployment, and the elements therein. We'll spend the bulk of the time looking at the concepts of a center of excellence and why this is important for scaling up your organization. And we'll look at how you operationalize process selection. We've looked at the process selection funnel before. Now we have to put an ongoing process around that. And of course, we have to consider governance and the importance of growing a tight but nimble governance structure. And finally, we'll look at the topic of Kaizen, or continuous improvement. What are the skills that you need to put in place to make sure that people are continuing to kick the tires of your own processes and operating model to make sure that you're getting the most that you possibly can from your organization? This little image came from one of the conferences I attended, and it sums up this chapter perfectly. In the beginning, you'll normally focus on a few elements, a few measures, typically costs and savings, to really prove the business case for automation. But the next step, once you've got through your pilot, is to industrialize your RPA process. And this means all the elements of scaling up, control, and skills that you need to put in place, and along with the most important factor, developing a target operating model. We hear of organizations that struggle to move beyond the pilot, and this generally is down to the simple reason of not fully considering the target operating model. And the target operating model includes the organization structure, the skills, and the priorities for the entire organization. We've seen this slide once before. At that time, we were focused on the pioneering phase. The pioneering phase needs someone to be leading from the front, being almost evangelical to help explain what automation is and drive the program forward. It can be a massive change, and you need a pioneering spirit to help drive that forward. Coming behind that pioneering spirit, you need a sustaining phase. How can you stabilize and make repeatable all of the things that you're finding as you're pioneering? And that's what sustaining is all about. It's about adoption, helping a wider range of people now understand what automation can do and apply it at a greater scale. And this may mean not only new technology introduction, but changing the fundamentals of delivery to be more innovative across the entire organization. Sustaining also means acceleration, accelerating the pace of change within your organization. During the pilot phase, you're focused on a single small area. Now, when you sustain, you're scaling up. You're now focused on many different areas at the same time. An industrialized solution and processes need to be in place to be able to continue to operate in a strong but light governance structure. And of course, I've mentioned it before, that continuous improvement ethic, continuing to strive for something more and something better. The lean startup principles we looked at during the pioneering phase continue to be a strong baseline for the approach you need to take even throughout the sustaining phase. Making regular updates, continuing to test your ideas with customers to gain feedback and make those changes rapidly ensures that you are always doing the right thing. We've touched on the topic of maturity a couple of times throughout the course, but that was predominantly in these early steps as you take your first steps and begin to evolve. This is a typical maturity model that you'll see from an automation journey, or from any journey for that matter. The first steps will basically be taking a proof of concept. You'll be faced with suspicion and you'll be faced with the need to probably make cultural change. You'll need to establish a strategy for staff concerns, a topic we've covered in a chapter all by itself. But also you'll need to be developing the skills needed to be able to implement automation. And you may recall we've identified 6 key skills as a component of that. We're going to revisit those 6 skills during this chapter as we evolve from just a pilot phase and into a scaling up phase within the context of a centre of excellence. In the early days, you're probably going to be taking your staff from internally. So you're looking for internal recruitment for your skills and for your program. And you're going to take a narrow focus. A pilot inevitably narrows you down to a specific area where you can test your ideas safely and in a controlled way before scaling up to the wider organisation. You will meet some early successes and you need to celebrate those successes, but relatively speaking, a pilot will only deliver a small amount of benefit compared to what the overall is achievable once you begin to scale. As you gain traction and your program evolves and gets more into an incubation phase, now the program is more accepting. People understand what automation is, and you start to see the team maturing now, not only in size but in skills. The operating model becomes an important component, both for the team and for the organisation as a whole. The focus changes from a very local focus now to a much wider focus, and there's definitely a need to adopt more experience into the team. Process redesign is a crucial component and it's been the backbone of this entire course. What you start to see during this phase is effectively the release of the benefits that you anticipated when you first put the pilot together and started to test your ideas right at the beginning of the program. Finally, you'll embrace your operating model. Typically, the operating model is a centre of excellence, but as we'll discuss, there are some variations on that may be more appropriate to your organisation. The organisation will be embracing automation, and there will be full buy-in across the whole board, not just top level. Your processes are in place to industrialise all of the things that you need, from governance to deployment to changes and regulation. Your strategy will be clear and will continue to have a North Star which will guide you in terms of all the activities that you undertake. Ongoing training will now probably be internal or different skill levels appropriate to the type of technology that you've got. And the standards are all in place for how processes are identified, documented, and automations are delivered. At this point, your ongoing real-time measurement system is in place and you can start to release the full benefits of automation. Few organisations are probably at the right of this chart, even those that have had a centre of excellence for some time. It's still a technology that's maturing as people learn more about what it can do and how it can be used. The very first automation program that we ran we ran as part of a program called Digitize the Enterprise, which was a bottom-up approach to driving skills through from the bottom of the organization up. We didn't anticipate some of the challenges that we faced from middle management, because we found that at a senior level, most executives support the principle of automation and the benefits that it can achieve. And interestingly, most of the staff who use automations also find the benefits. But it can be middle management who actually struggle with the concept of automation, who may actually be more used to running teams and may actually be fearful of the challenge of losing those teams and their role in the future. For this reason, it's really crucial that there is both a top-down and bottom-up approach to automation, but that senior support very early on is crucial. Not only because now of the press and the need to have a very clear message on what's happening to the people, but also to help drive through that this is a priority for the organisation and not something that can be stalled by middle management. With that principle of top-down and bottom-up and middle management, there is a concept in Lean called Hoshin Kanri. Hoshin Kanri helps you to align company goals or the strategy with the plans of middle management, the tactics, and the work performed by employees, the operations, to ensure that everyone is pulling in the same direction at the same time. With Hoshin Kanri in place, we would have avoided the problem we encountered in that first automation program. The first step of Hoshin Kanri is creating a shared vision. People always perform best when they have a purpose, when they understand not just what to do, but why it's important. One of the benefits of Hoshin Kanri is that it can help create a purpose, providing focus and drive towards specific and important goals. Putting effort into creating a shared vision of the strategic plan and associated tactics, the plans and the techniques that you need to get there, is essential. Make sure as many employees as possible are given an opportunity to understand why the strategic goals are important and how the tactics and operational details support those goals. From a lean perspective, it has always been the case that the most important person in the organisation is the person on the shop floor doing the job. And middle management and senior executive are there to help support the delivery of that role. In equal measure though, the senior management and middle management need to be setting the goals and KPIs and direction for the organisation and helping making sure that everyone understands that purpose. The best results are achieved when everyone is pulling in the same direction. The first takeaway from this chapter is definitely creating a shared vision. It's time to take a short time out and consider what we've learned about Hoshin Kanri. Now, a strategy exercise would normally take multiple days to achieve, so we're not quite looking for that in this exercise. But we just want to spend 10 minutes to think about the 3 things we've just learned. So from your perspective, what is your view for the automation strategy? How are mid-management engaged to drive the tactics? And what is needed then to operationalise? Just jot down a few key notes. Pause the video to take some time, and then we'd love to hear your answers at the rpaacademy.com/social. Okay, welcome back. So, moving on, learning a bit more about Hoshin Kanri. Step 1 of Hoshin Kanri is to create a strategic plan. A strategic plan that covers 1, 3 to 5 years that is developed by top management to further the long-range goals of the company. This plan should be carefully crafted to address a small number of critical issues. Key items to consider when developing a strategic plan are first, to focus on 5 goals or less. Focusing on a small number of goals makes success far more likely than dissipating energy across dozens of goals. Or looking at it another way, if everything is important, nothing becomes important. Effectiveness first. Efficiency is doing the right thing, while effectiveness is doing the right things. Strategic goals need to be effective. Top-down consensus and engagement. Taking the time to consult with middle management serves two useful purposes. First, it provides additional perspective and feedback that helps craft stronger, more informed strategies. It creates a sense of shared responsibility for the plan and significantly more buy-in from middle management. KPIs to drive behaviours. KPIs have a considerable ability to drive behaviour, so choose KPIs with care. It is essential to think through whether the selected KPIs will drive the desired behaviour without unintended side effects. Remember, what gets measured gets done. Clear ownership. Every goal should have an owner, a facilitator and coach who has the skills and authority to successfully see the goal through to conclusion. Step 2 is to develop the tactics. At a department level, mid-level managers develop tactics that will best achieve the goals as laid out by top management. One of the most important aspects of this process is called catchball, a back and forth exchange with top senior management and middle management to ensure that the strategy and goals are well understood, that there is a strong alignment between strategy and tactics, and the KPIs are meaningful and appropriate. Tactics may change throughout the course of fulfilling the strategy. Flexibility and adaptability are important characteristics of the process. As a result, it is helpful to have regular progress meetings, at which time results can be evaluated and any tactics recalibrated. Step 3 is to take action. Supervisors and team leaders work out the operational details to implement the tactics as laid out by mid-level managers. Ensure that the activities are strongly aligned with tactics and strategy. This is the level where the goals and the plans are transformed into results. This is the Gemba, the place where real action occurs. Therefore, managers should stay closely connected to this activity. Go and see what's happening at the Gemba. Value stream analysis is an important tool here to evaluate whether the activities are meeting the strategy and the tactics. Step 4 will probably come as no surprise. Review and adjust. So far, the steps have focused on cascading strategic goals down through levels of the company, from top management all the way down to the shop floor. Equally important is the flow of information in the opposite direction. Information about progress and results. It is the second flow that creates the closed loop system, enabling control and adjustment of the entire process. Progress should be tracked continuously and reviewed formally on a regular basis. These progress checkpoints provide an opportunity for adjustment of tactics and their associated operational details. Irrespective of an organization's starting point for robotic process automation, there will come a point when the attention will turn to considering the pros and cons of developing a centre of excellence. The lessons learned from early implementations will inform what works for your organization specifically and trigger a move away from an evolutionary approach to a more designed or architected approach. In other words, you're going to start to develop a target operating model. Our hypothesis is that to deliver on the full promise and potential of robotic automation, you will likely need to develop a centre of excellence. When considering business transformation, there are several models that can be used to prompt an effective debate, but one of the most common is whether an organisation should develop a centralised or decentralised approach, or somewhere in the middle, a hybrid approach. And that's the approach we're going to take to evaluating whether a centre of excellence is right for you. Let's first consider the two extremes. Let's look at the decentralised or federated model. This business-centric approach to RPA provides a platform for rapid initial progress, but can lead to some challenges of control and scalability. Inevitably, these are business-led activities and can often exclude IT involvement, initially resulting in IT functions which are rarely sympathetic to engaging in RPA solutions long term, perceiving them as toys and not necessarily the proper solution. Increasing awareness of robotic automation is slowly changing that perception. At the other end of the scale, we have the centralized model. This is an alternative evolution of RPA and sometimes called the IT-centric model. It's a centralized approach which utilizes existing software development lifecycle methodology. And this is often far too heavyweight for RPA tools, resulting in slower and more costly implementations. Fully centralized models can be successful, but introduce unnecessary and costly overheads. The hybrid model navigates a strong middle path that sacrifices a little of the perceived independence from the federated model, but gains the strength of IT governance that has been optimized and now fit for purpose for robotic automation. The team is then largely staffed by resources that are either technology people with strong business understanding or business people with strong technology skills. It's a model that has worked terrifically well when exploring innovation and rapid development approaches. Robotic automation requires a new range of competencies and skills to be developed across the entire organization. Developing a centre of excellence is an effective way to gather, assess and manage the knowledge and capabilities, while providing some shared guidance on solutions to challenges faced along the way. Each organisation differs in size, shape, maturity and culture, so it is never likely to be a blanket statement that one size fits all. However, as we are all learning more about each day, the path that becomes more popular is the hybrid approach. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. The centralized model then provides a single centralized team of robotic automation experience. The benefits are resource resilience is higher as you've got skills now shared across the entire organization, and allows focus on the biggest impact or cost benefit for the whole organization, not just for the local team. And it has a better utilization for niche skills such as architecture or even development, which could be rare depending on the tool that you've selected. Some of the challenges faced though with the centralized approach is the lack of responsiveness and the difficulty in staying in touch with local business priorities. If we look at the federated approach next, this is the situation where each business area develops its own robotic delivery function. And this means there are some great benefits. The teams are in touch and very responsive to local needs because they're embedded in those teams already. And there's no overheads from central oversight or development. However, the purely federated approach can lead to a proliferation of technologies. It can result in a high variability in the quality of skills and provide you with some resilience challenges. It is highly susceptible to resource risk and develops in the long term higher costs and lower controls. That's why the hybrid approach tends to be the one that's favoured. The hybrid approach is a combination of a core team and multiple local teams who all have the focus in the individual local areas. A core team defines the standards, architecture, technology and controls, so everyone is being consistent. But those teams are also closely linked with the local teams who focus on specific process automation and the ongoing maintenance. The benefits of this is it balances both responsiveness and resilience, and it gives you the sort of combination of the two extremes. And the consistent approach provides the opportunity for more cross-company sharing. There are a few challenges with this approach, but they're part of the compromise. Delivery is not always in the highest benefit order, as some of the local teams will develop automations with a lower benefit than a different team. The first level of technical support is placed within the business functions, and this will be highly dependent upon the technology choice as to what extent that can happen. Same with version control. Depending on the technology choice, version control becomes a local responsibility, which is fine if it's embedded within the software, but more challenging if it's something you have to do as an extra process step. One final word on these different approaches is that sometimes the models are a combination of all of these things. That some teams may be purely supported by the centralized model, and some other teams may be only very, very lightly touched by the centralized model. And this is the ultimate flexibility of the hybrid approach. You can tailor the level and degree of centralization to decentralization based on the specific needs of each individual function, while gaining the overall resilience and the flexibility that's needed for each of those functions. So again, even the hybrid approach isn't exactly a one-size-fits-all specification. A straw poll at a recent RPA and AI conference revealed that robotic process automation initiatives had mostly begun in business functions and had not developed as an extension of IT. When drilling a little bit more deeper into this question, the reasons became self-evident, with tales of sluggish IT functions, inflexible and out of touch with business needs, who are unable or unwilling to assist, all dominating the discussions. Even more recently, a webinar held by Minefields further demonstrated the situation with regard to the role of IT, with over 80% of participants polled indicated that robotic automation belonged in the business functions. And 90% of them also believed that a COE was an essential component of a successful RPA delivery. The good news is more and more organisations are adopting a hybrid approach. But let's have a look at the different approaches and some of the challenges and problems faced regarding the IT involvement. So the centralized approach, the key characteristic is that robotic automations are launched from within the IT function and typically based on software development, change and control principles. It's almost certainly an entirely IT-led approach, though centralized business function is a conceivable variation of this model. The problems faced, though, with a pure centralized approach is that governance is too heavyweight for the robotic automation toolset. It becomes much less responsive, and development time significantly reduces the impact and savings opportunities. On the flip side, the federated approach, robotic automation programs are typically initiated within local functions. So separate teams start an automation program without any awareness of other teams also doing the same thing. The level of IT involvement is pretty low, if any at all. And the problems faced are that the solution is then perceived as non-strategic. And you may be missing many key skills such as process improvement, standards, version control, architecture, and increasingly important, security. The hybrid approach then provides a core team defining the standards, the architecture, the technology and the controls. And the local teams focus on specific processes and the ongoing maintenance. The level of IT involvement provides mixed skills, including IT, to ensure fit-for-purpose governance, standards, and deep links with the change control to respond to advances and changes in the underlying systems. The hybrid approach is actually, in a way, to address the key problem of the IT divide, with robotic automation increasingly not seen as a purely tactical approach, but also having some strategic value too. The conclusion of this slide really is that the best hybrid approach is one that combines both business skills and technical skills in the right level. Earlier in this course, we looked at the 6 key skills that are essential to a successful RPA implementation. We're now going to revisit those skills, but actually separate the responsibilities between the core responsibilities and the local responsibilities, assuming we proceed with a hybrid model. The first skill wasn't just governance, but was actually leader, evangelist, advocate, and responsibility for governance. And the description of this role was to ensure they maintain consistency and control of the approach. This means at the core level, they are responsible for standards, SLA reviews, processes for robotic process automation, and raising awareness generally across the entire organisation. Local responsibilities then become the prioritisation of which is the next process to automate, and categorisation of the types of solution available for those types of problem. Process improvement then is responsible for the optimization of processes ready for automation. And the core responsibilities there are to provide shared resources for optimization, be that training, support, and facilitation where necessary. But the local responsibilities are for the initial assessment and process reviews, and the optimization of those processes for automation. The local knowledge is critical to being able to provide the optimization necessary, whereas the challenging lean thinking and skills and training can often sit centrally. The next skill is operating model, changing the organizational design to support robotic automation. This is where the Hoshin Kanri can also fit in, because actually at the operating model level, the central function is there to challenge organizational thinking and build new robotic operating models. But it's going to be local responsibility with the operational requirement to implement those new operating models. Architecture is a key central skill, and providing the technology guidance not only for the new process automation technologies, but for the underlying applications. Architecture then is a core responsibility that controls technology choice, configuration, maintenance, and ongoing contract management and review. The development skill is to develop robotic automations, and centrally that is to test new concepts, shared resources for development locally that can be shared out to meet critical demand when necessary, and also the definition of standards. These standards may also include things such as peer reviews. But it's the local responsibilities typically to develop the automation. It's with development though that perhaps the choice of technology can vary in terms of where the development occurs. Some of the more technology-driven solutions rather than business-led solutions that we've seen may sit more in a core team. If you're building business entities, for example, then the level of skill needed is highly technical. But if you're using a tool such as Win Automation, then probably 80% of the development can happen locally. So it is going to vary depending upon your type of organization. Finally, we've got an operations function whose responsibility is for the maintenance of existing robot automations. And there are probably a couple of different choices here in terms of how this can work. This could be a purely centralized function, optimizing robot utilization across the entire portfolio. But there can be some local responsibilities, particularly around maintenance. So, for example, if you get a regulatory change requiring amendments to a number of robots, that might be handled more locally. All of these roles and responsibilities need to be defined clearly and applied when building a centre of excellence. Do you remember the RPA game plan? These were the phases we looked at when first developing your RPA strategy. They're the phases you go through, starting with your raising awareness and initial first tentative steps into a pilot, to developing your full operating model, scaling up, and finally sustaining the whole program. Not surprisingly, different skills come in at different points of this process. So leadership and governance is needed right at the very beginning, right from the very start, from raising awareness. And process improvement skills needed soon after, as evaluating and identifying the right processes and optimizing those processes is one of the first tasks you need to complete. Next, technology architecture and operating model skills are needed as you start to define the new operating model and making choices about the technology. It's only then that development skills are necessary for starting to build those automations. Initially, especially if you're running desktop automation, the need for ongoing operation support may be minimum. But as the program scales up, there is definitely going to be a need for performance monitoring and optimization and support for all of the automations that have been built. When you look at the game plan this way, it is interesting that probably one of the first things recruiters are asked about are the development skills. Yet it's really important to establish all these other components as well, not just the pure technical. We can also apply the same thinking to our automation delivery lifecycle. Remember, these are the stages we go through from insight to piloting and getting started, through finally to scaling and sustaining through your Centre of Excellence. And it's a very similar picture, that the skills you're going to need at the very beginning to raise awareness and select the approach is more around leadership, standards and governance. And only when you start getting started do the skills of process mapping, process improvement, and RPA development, testing, and collaboration kick in. And you don't have to worry too much about the operating model while you're piloting. It's one of the criteria you can put out of scope and revisit from the conclusions that you find. But by the time you reach the point when you're starting to think about building a Centre of Excellence, then the skills of operating model and organisational design, the technical architecture and solution design for long-term support, and the operations maintenance are all skills that are going to be essential. The process selection funnel we looked at previously to identify some of the opportunities for initial piloting continue to be a core component when you operationalise your process selection. It continues to be part of that initial selection funnel as you collect data and you assess which is the next most likely candidate. But now you need to sort of create an iterative or continuous approach to evaluating the available data to identify which are the next items that are going to come out of the hopper. And that means an ongoing process not only of selection but also of the value stream mapping. The value stream mapping providing you with the end-to-end view of the process, elimination of waste, resequencing of processes for optimized for robotic automation, and if necessary, the leveling of those processes to make them more stable over time. And then the process design, the detailed view that we've seen that actually allows you to maintain the level of business knowledge needed even if you lose staff in the long term. And this provides the detailed steps that you can then begin to carry over into your automation program. So operationalizing the process selection iterates through opportunity assessment, value stream mapping, solution design, and testing and implementation. And this is an iterative approach that fits very closely with the MVP or minimum viable product approach that we saw in the lean startup. It's a continuous delivery model where you are getting regular outputs and deliveries to have real impact on your business and on your customers. Next, we're going to talk about governance. There are already several elements of governance that we've talked about as we've discussed other topics. Governance includes things such as putting in the right measures and monitoring those measures to ensure success. They include making sure you have the right people with the right skills, and you have a clear strategy and a clear plan. But now let's take a step back from the pragmatic day-to-day operations and look at the program as a whole across the entire organization. What levels of governance do you want to put in place to ensure success and control? And there are three typical levels of governance that fit within a COE model. You've got what is the level of responsibilities that sit at the business level, what are the level of responsibilities that sit with the COE, and what are the levels of responsibilities that sit at the organisation as a whole. And that's where your steering committee comes in. Now, you may decide to put a steering committee in place right at the beginning, before you even begin your pilot. And that's fine. If it's a strategic piece of work, then actually starting to establish the levels of understanding and ownership from all areas of the company is important. But if your pilot is just to test out some of the ideas that you're not sure whether you're going to progress or not, onto what level, then perhaps the steering committee is something that you only put in place once the pilot is successful and you decide now is the right time to scale up. In effect, the list of people that we have, or roles that we have within the steering committee, is simply an example of all the key areas of any business that need to be involved in terms of being aware of what is happening and being able to have their say in terms of what is needed within an automation program. And that starts at the top of the organization with the business executive and the IT or CIO lead. Also, whoever is your evangelist, your leader for the RPA program and the leader of the Centre of Excellence needs to have a seat on that table. Risk, compliance, audit, financial crime are all elements that simply have inputs to be able to structure and evaluate the impact of what's going on. Failed RPA pilots often have challenges of change delivery, and so change delivery is still a key component. And of course, security and data governance. To be honest, this isn't an exhaustive list. Each organisation will have some other key roles that you'll need to add yourself. The Centre of Excellence then is there to define the programme as a whole. So the RPA lead is a key role within that group to be able to set the vision and drive the momentum forward for the organisation. You may decide to use an implementation partner of some kind, a third party that can help you both select the technology vendor, but also help you through the pilot and the scaling phases. And they will tend to have a seat at that table. Having a chief technology officer being there available to be able to not only provide the technology advice, but also to provide that link to the underlying systems. And then, of course, the solution design, making sure that your solution is maintainable and robust and flexible. Within each of the business areas then, you're going to have a different combination of process owners, SMEs, and process improvement people there to evaluate and improve processes. You're likely to have local developers and testing, and a project lead or maybe Scrum Masters to drive individual activities forward. And of course, different teams may have different risk and compliance profiles that will need that local understanding to be able to implement. While governance is there to give you control, that's not the main reason. The key element of governance is around protection, making sure that you have sufficiently thought through all of the elements of your RPA program and they are robust enough to withstand the pressures of day-to-day operation. The final topic in this chapter is continuous improvement, or Kaizen. Now, I could have put this topic of discussion in almost any chapter, but it fits quite well here in operationalisation, as I go back to those original lean principles, the final one of which was striving for perfection. Striving for perfection was really about the fact that there's always an opportunity to improve. There's always something that you can do better. And so with Kaizen, that's why we've put it here. There's always something we can do better within the program, within our operating model, and within the team that we've established. Now it's interesting, the word Kaizen actually comes from two Japanese characters. One's called Kai and one's called Zen. And Kai is to take apart and Zen is to make good. And that's exactly what we're doing with our processes. We're dismantling our processes down to its key constituents and then reassembling them in a much better order. The key point of Kaizen was always about elimination of waste, but it's more about the people that we want to bring to the fore, because the foundations of Kaizen are the people, employees being empowered and encouraged to make changes themselves and identify those solutions themselves. So working together in small collaborative teams to develop automations is a really great model for driving change forward. For those who work in an agile environment, these are sometimes called feature teams, and there's a lot of similarities between feature teams and the way that the lean startup operates. So what are the key things that underpin continuous improvement? Well, the first one is a no blame culture. It's all about focusing on the problem, not the people. It's all about teamwork as well, and that collaboration. It's also about having an established vision so that you can see the direction of travel, and so you know the actions you're taking are moving you closer to that final vision. And it's about continuous feedback. Remember the lean startup framework of learn, build and measure. That measure was part of the feedback loop. It's about continuous improvement, encouraging everybody to make small improvements every day. And it's about accountability and ownership, feeling part of the event and feeling empowered to make changes yourselves. We often find technology change is actually less about the technology and more about the culture and the people and the adoption of that technology. So spending time on understanding the people and helping them to adapt and adopt the technology is a real key step to any improvement program, but also particularly with RPA with such a significant impact on every component of the business. And I'm going to finish this chapter with a key component of lean thinking. When we strive for that perfect process, we look for a process that has the right purpose, i.e. it's value adding at every step. It has the best method that we can achieve right now, which is the process. But the important part there is right now, that there may be further improvements we can make later on. And it also has the highest sense of accomplishment with regard to the people. And this is some of the feedback we see with automation, where automation does take away some of the mundane tasks and give them a higher sense of accomplishment. And then within that process, we see that each step is valuable. There's no waste. That it's capable. And by capable, we mean it's quality built in. We get it right first time, every time. That it's available when it's needed. That it's adequate and can produce what is needed at the rate or volume that is necessary. And that it's flexible, that it can be adapted quickly if there is a need for a change, such as regulatory change. So these, in essence, are elements for us to strive towards within each of our RPA implementations to make sure that the processes that we develop and automate have the right purpose, the best method, and give us the highest sense of accomplishment. So we're nearing the conclusion now of the goals we laid out at the beginning of this course. Today we've been talking about moving beyond the pilot, and we've touched a little on some of the things for sustaining your automation program. In the final chapter, we're going to look at some of the automation challenges that you're going to face and how Lean RPA can help you solve them. If we take a look at our automation delivery lifecycle, then we'll see that the topics we've discovered in this chapter have all been around building a centre of excellence. We started by looking at the strategy deployment, or Hoshin Kanri, the way that you define strategic, tactical and operational goals. We've also looked at how we prioritize the backlog and now create that as part of a continuous ongoing exercise. We've also looked at the different operating models, centralized, federated, and of course our preference, which is hybrid. And we've also started to look at operationalisation of that model with topics such as governance. Thank you for listening. And as always, please feel free to provide us feedback either directly at the email address on the next screen or directly on the RPA Academy forums. Thank you again.